closing the book on 2021, and I gotta be honest, it wasn't always an easy read, but looking back gives us a chance to reflect on the year that was, and I'm not doing any of that without a little something to sip on. Every weeknight, we press pause on the news cycle to take a deep dive into a wide range of topics and try to show y'all a side of stories you haven't seen before. 2021 was a different kind of hellscape. It was the second year of a deadly pandemic that started with an attack on the seat of US democracy. Our original investigation series, Newsy walked us through a visual timeline of an insurrection that was filmed, tweeted, and live streamed from hundreds of different sources. Just a few weeks later, Ground Zero was the site of a one-of-a-kind inauguration that was quite a bit more locked down than we're used to.
We're about 2 blocks away from the Capitol, as you can see, and this is about as close as, excuse me. All right, so now we're 5 blocks away from the Capitol.
And in a year when the continuing pandemic posed all sorts of questions about what we can and can't do safely, we tried to get a vibe check on comfort levels. How do you feel about fist bumps?
I can do fist bumps.
Okay.
With friends. Yeah, heck yeah.
I guess I'm a friend now.
You're a friend now.
Throughout the year, we did what we do best, taking a deep dive on some major stories.
They were cut out of benefits that they may need.
Having spaces where we can really celebrate each other's differences is like kind of what it's all about.
While also keeping things, let's say, distinctive.
Describe to me how you guys first met. Naomi, did you just start following this dancing fox around everywhere?
I've never heard of a beautiful witch before. Only bad witches are ugly.
Well, progress or not, it was still the 1930s.
What was it like being a part of, a history-making movement in a way? I mean, what can you say about that moment in time?
It was fun to me.
But maybe most importantly, we didn't do any of this alone. ITL is powered by reporting from around the company, so we're tapping into that fuel source one more time by talking to Newsy's correspondents about the stories that defined this year. 2021 was a special year for TikTok. For starters, its usage is growing among the youths. TikTok was more popular than Instagram this year for users aged 12 to 17, according to a survey by Forrester. We figured, in order to talk about the cool kids, we should bring in our coolest kid. Please welcome to the party, Newsy's Cody LaGrove.
Thank you, Christian.
Cody, I want to, before we get into it, let me cheers you real quick.
Oh yeah, cheers. Happy New Year's Eve, Christian. Christian, look, my knees can't handle all the choreo that comes with TikTok, but the app did spark some of my favorite reporting from this year.
Which begs the question, who was, of the cast of characters you interviewed, who was your favorite subject?
Hands down, the award goes to Grandpa G. He is my favorite, and here's a reminder why.
Ideas then become videos. And G's story about meeting Gladys Knight.
He had Gladys call me at the barbershop.
Gets on that midday train to TikTok.
Gladys said, "Hello, Norman." I said, "Yes." I said, "Hi, Gladys. How you doing?"
He's positive reinforcement.
I am super fantastic.
And a reminder to dance like no one's watching, even when hundreds of thousands of people are.
In the beginning, start with more energy, okay?
Okay.
Shake it, shake it, shake it, yeah, shake it. That was a good one.
Of course, we have it.
What exactly did that story leave you with?
Well, one, that is the art of production, Christian. I'm telling you, those stories were longer than the ones you saw. So there were details that are left on the director's cut, we'll say. So there's a tease for the website. But mostly that story left me with, that social media does not have to be this tool we associate with our own demise. It's a story that is a vessel of joy and enforces that authenticity should be celebrated. And Grandpa G reminded me that a life focused on family and friends and loving thy neighbor is far richer than a life filled with material things. So it's a good reminder that it's also never too late to learn something new.
Cody, this is what is special about you. You took a story about TikTok, about an old black man in his later years using TikTok, using his grandkids, to help him, use this tool, and found a deeper purpose during our TikTok Tuesday segment throughout the year.
Yeah, we discussed everything. One, thank you for saying so. But, TikTok has opened the doors for a new kind of reporting. I mean, we talked about Clubhouse, that new social media app. We dabbled in NFTs because I'm the person you look to for investment advice. We even talked about polyamory, religion, and body positivity. So, I mean, we covered the gamut.
Cody, what was, and I'm sure this is tough considering the stories that you covered this year. What was the best part about this experience in doing TikTok Tuesday and covering all the things that you covered? What was the best part about that?
I truly enjoyed getting to know some of these creators because, I mean, a lot of them are characters you have in the palm of your hand often. They almost feel like friends or family. So whether we like to admit it or not, these content creators are modern day artists. And if a content creator has the guts to unpack a taboo topic, then, I'm leaning into that combo. This year, my favorite was probably when we talked about mental health. Do you remember Rod, Christian?
I remember Rod. Rod's a star. Rod blew up.
Rod is a star. Okay, in February, Rod was talking to me.
We all have these thoughts, so first of all, don't think you're alone in them. Bring up like anything that's weighing you down as well. I mean, we're all in this together, like you had said at the beginning of this call.
By October, he was talking to Zendaya and Timothy Chalamet. It was truly one of those where it was like
only slightly. Okay, he moved up only slightly. All right,
it was
they're A-list. You're B. Okay, they're A-list, but you're B. So
thank you again. I'll take B-list. I'll take it. But he did this all by talking about his anxiety in the middle of a pandemic. So kind of taking that fear and turning it into a full-blown brand and business. He is a genuinely nice guy, and it's very cool to see him winning.
It's amazing to look at the work that you've done this year and to kind of look back on what things you've taken away because, truly when you talk about TikTok, people may look at this platform and think, it's all frivolous, ephemeral sort of content, but there's always a way to communicate a message. It just so happens that, some of our life lessons aren't coming from Aesop's fables and the Bernstein Bears. They're coming from creators on TikTok, which I think is pretty awesome. Can I cheers you one more time, Cody?
Cheers. Happy New Year, Christian.
Happy New Year's to you too, bud.
No matter how many experts I talk to, the one thing that they stressed at this point is that we're really not out of the woods yet.
Introducing a new point of view. Yours. Newsy. Watch free 24/7.
Welcome back, gang. Joining us now is somebody who has covered a range of tech stories for non-tech savvy people like me who are perpetually online, and he's a pretty familiar face here on ITL. Please welcome Newsy tech correspondent Tyler Atkinson. What's up, Taddy?
You're too kind. I am just looking forward to getting out of the whatever we would qualify 2021 as. I don't know how much worse it was in 2020 and trying to see where we even move forward at this point, but I'm at least happy to talk to you here.
I appreciate that, man. Whatever happens, we'll always have each other, so cheers.
So I don't have champagne, mostly because if you went and told me to go to the store and get some, I would be like, what am I doing? So I have brought in, because I'm in Chicago, obviously, I brought in Chicago's finest Malort here. And also because you're one of the only people I know that would actually have this with me. And so I'll try not to make the face here, but cheers, my friend.
Cheers, brother. We're coming in with some real chaotic energy, and I think that is perfect for recapping 2021. A lot has happened in the world of tech this year. Talk to us a little bit about the biggest stories that stood out to you this year. What did you spend most of your time focusing on this year?
It's so weird to think about how at the beginning of the year, I was so hyper fixated on the way that social media was, playing a role in what we were hearing about the election.
Election week served as a test for social media companies that recently issued a number of updates about how they intend to deal with election-related misinformation. Twitter is taking the most aggressive action to combat misinformation. On election night, they quickly placed a warning on President Trump's tweet for making a potentially misleading claim about an election. The label blocked users from responding, favoriting, or retweeting the post.
On the Twitter side, it was the fastest one we'd seen. This was much faster in terms of how fast they added the label.
To now seeing a year later where we're still dealing with the consequences of that. But, beyond there, I think the biggest things that really have stuck out to me this year is, one, the rash of ransomware attacks that we have seen across all sorts of different industries and whatnot. No matter how many experts I talk to, the one thing that they stressed at this point is that we're really not out of the woods yet. And if anything, we were only just getting a sense on the public level how these technological issues that come up now end up impacting us in all sorts of ways.
Worldwide ransomware damages are expected to cost companies and governments $20 billion in 2021.
Paying a ransom is putting money into the hands of those criminals. And that is a really tough pill to swallow for many of the victims that we work with, and is frankly the worst part about this job.
Experts note that one way to avoid ransomware payments is for companies to put more resources toward detecting and stopping future cyber attacks rather than default to paying.
Beyond that, I think the semiconductor shortage issue has been particularly interesting for a similar reason as well. We've never really, I think, had to collectively think about the tiniest and tiniest pieces of what runs our daily lives now being all out of the, when it's gone all of a sudden, you then have to just figure out how you're going to cope with it.
For the last 40 years, the semiconductor industry has been known for, wild shortages and wild oversupply. You can't really build a small factory, so you got to build this mega factory.
Semiconductor fabrication plants, also known as fabs or foundries, take billions of dollars and years to construct. Designing and constructing chip parts, known as wafers, is a months-long process that includes heating silica sand to over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
The more complicated the product is, the longer it's in the factory. So this is like a photography process, and that wafer will go through the factory dozens of times.
I want to go back to ransomware for a moment, because we know we haven't seen the last of ransomware attacks. So, I mean, what's something we need to be cautious of heading into the new year?
Log4j, this new exploit that has been found through these logging systems. Log4j is essentially a logger tool that is used in the JavaScript coding language that makes it so, say, if I'm running these things, I can be able to see all of the different traffic that's going through, whatever entity I own, and then being able to use that tool to also troubleshoot any kind of bugs or issues that come up at this point. But all of a sudden, we're now realizing that any business that is utilizing this within their own products can basically be infected with malicious code. Now, the reason I think it's going to be a big deal moving forward is because of the fact that in a lot of cases in which cyber criminals are trying to infect your computer or encrypt your data or things like that, they may find a way in using that exploit and then sit there for, an untold amount of time until they figure out exactly how much money they can exploit from you, what kind of data they have on you, and things like that.
Another thing that I feel like has kind of captured headlines this year is everything going on with, big tech. This year, we've seen a lot of attempts to crack down on big tech, and a lot of heads of tech companies have almost had, seemingly permanent reservations on Capitol Hill. Do you feel like there's been any significant progress to crack down on big tech here in the U.S.?
There is definitely an appetite out there on a political level to make sure that these companies are reined in at a certain point. But I think the thing that's really kind of held up all this, not to drag it back into the political realm, but it is a matter of the fact that you have deadlocked, House and Senate. And right now, both parties agree that something needs to be done about the way that these tech companies go about doing their business, but they can't find a middle ground or a consensus about how they want to move forward and actually remedy the situation. Because I think the one thing that's kind of wild to think about with this big tech sort of issue and the ways that you have to deal with it is it's like dealing with a dragon with 5 different heads. It's not just an issue of antitrust and competition. It's not just an issue of mis and disinformation. it's so many different facets that you have to find a way to be able to get everybody on the same page about how do we move forward and actually deal with this problem.
We've talked about ransomware. We've talked about big tech. We've talked about semiconductors. These are all things you covered, for the company and for ITL over the last year. Newsy's tech correspondent, Tyler Atkinson, we appreciate all the work that you've done in helping us noobs understand the world of tech. And we're looking forward to going into the new year and really kind of delving into this even more. Taddy, I'm going to take another cheers. You don't have to, because I know what you're sipping on, but I'm going to take another cheers. Thank you so much for joining us.
I will cheers you.
Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it.
We're going to keep this party going. Joining us now is somebody who has covered a range of stories in a very demanding year. Please welcome Newsy national correspondent and good friend of ITL, Amber Strong.
Glad to be here. There was no applause.
I introduced you like you were getting ready to actually join me in the newsroom. Amber, I just want to cheers you. Do you have something nearby?
Yes. Yeah, yes. The Olivia Pope glass.
That's it. This is okay.
Not
well, cheers
large.
to you. It's been a wild year, so here we go.
This is apple juice, by the way.
See,
It's modest.
Mine might be a little stronger than that, right? Yeah, mine might be a little stronger than that. It's been one of my favorite parts of ITL, getting a chance to talk to you, Amber, because you bring just such a casual, professional, very mature presence to a lot of the reporting that you do. A lot of the pieces you turn for In the Loop brought with it historical context. And in a year when teaching history has been, kind of fraught, you unpacked what's happening now by looking back. Tell me a bit about one of your favorite dives into historical context this year.
I think this has been a challenging year for those of us who really want to explore history. One of my favorites was, we grew up with this mantra, give us your poor, give us your tired, give us your tired, give us your poor. And, that hasn't always been the case for the way the country views refugees. In fact, as I started to really research for you guys, I found that only about 50% of the country viewed refugees that way. And that was throughout history. That was despite the conflict. That was even despite, the country of origin. In 1979, 6 years after U.S. troops left the Vietnam War, Gallup researchers asked if Americans favored relaxing immigration policies in order to give safe haven to Vietnamese people still fleeing communist rule. 57% said no. In 1999, Gallup asked if Americans were okay with several hundred Albanian refugees who'd already arrived from Kosovo. 66% supported the notion.
I'd love to see is consistency. I'd love to see people across our nation consistently welcoming refugees, regardless of what country they're coming from, as long as they are genuinely in need.
That inspired me to stop with, the idea of what we grew up learning is the truth, and to dig deeper into these stories on what does history really say.
So one of the questions I have, Amber, why did you feel like looking back on history was the right storytelling approach with a story like this and others?
So I'm gonna throw some cliches and some proverbs at you. One is, there's nothing new under the sun.
Go ahead, throw them out there.
Anyway, there's nothing new under the sun. And then those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. There's no greater teacher than history. And I think that our mission at Newsy, as I understand it, is, well, I'm not writing anybody's checks, but as I understand it, our job is to turn down the temperature, right? And just bring the facts. Mm-hmm. And we live in a world right now that is full of exaggeration. It's full of overstatements. This is the most violence we've ever seen. This is the most divided we've ever been. And it's like, we fought a whole civil war, is it? What does history say about where we stand? What does history say about how we tackled these issues in the past? And then what can we learn from that to move forward? And it's been so inspirational for me, and it's driving me to continue that sort of research and that sort of storytelling.
From school board battles
To restaurant attacks, to airplane standoffs, more than 4,000 unruly passenger reports, and 3,000 plus mask-related incidents to be exact. The country seems a bit like a balloon, ready to pop. It's hard to know if the world is getting angrier or if it's just a matter of perception. Here's what we do know. Relationships have splintered. A recent survey from OnePoll Research says 16% of Americans have let go of 3 friendships since the pandemic started. 2 top reasons: political divides and disagreements over the COVID-19 vaccine. In times of uncertainty, some people turn to faith for answers. But if you ask any faith leader, they'll tell you the division is nothing new. At least that's what they told me when I went on my own journey to figure out what's driving the angst and how to find peace. In DC's DuPont Circle, Rabbi Lori Green tells me you have to start by defining peace.
It's not just like the absence of conflict, right? But there's kind of an internal wholeness and completion, and that's what brings peace.
She says the current absence of personal peace comes from the need to be in control.
We delude ourselves into thinking that we have a lot more control over the world than we really do. And I think something like this shows us all, especially us, you know, smart, wealthy, we know how to control everything and we run the world Westerners, that's actually not so true.
I think the world is really maddening right now, right?
And yet Yale University's chaplain Omer Bajwa says he believes the present chaos is predictable.
Life is not meant to be frictionless or without turbulence. There is turbulence that is inevitable at some level in our lives, right? At every interpersonal, societal, we would say even sort of communal, political, social level, there's going to be turbulence. The question is the response.
Newsy national correspondent Amber Strong, friend of ITL, thank you so much for joining us, and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you as well, Christian.
I'm in my fancy pajamas and I have my sparkling water.
Right now, we're going to bring in someone who's had a long 2 years, I think, if I'm assuming correctly. If you've tuned into any show on Newsy, including ITL, you've probably seen her keeping us informed on all things COVID. Here to debrief with us is Newsy's health and science correspondent, Lindsey Thies. Lindsey, vibe check.
Oh my goodness. It's been a tough year, really. I mean, there were parts along the way. I remember January 2020 filing my very first COVID story for Newsy about what is this mysterious illness in Wuhan, China, and now here we are 2 years later. Yeah, sometimes it's been very tough. 2021 has also been good to me. I got married to my husband, so thank goodness for him. He's been an emotional rock. You know, 2021 started off really kind of on this high note where we were covering vaccines and there was a lot of like hope and inspiration in the year. And then, of course, with Delta, and then at the end of this year with Omicron, that's become definitely very tough. So, you know, I do think, though, as the science moves so fast on this, it's really kind of, as a journalist, what calls me to keep coming to work every day, because one, you don't know what the next science story is going to hold, and two, right now, it is just so important to keep getting the accurate information out there, CB.
One of the things that I wanted to kind of chat with you about is that it's kind of crazy thinking that the chat we had at the end of last year and where we are now, looking at the difference between where we were and where we are a whole year later, and we are still in the thick of it, right? Both Omicron and Delta have been making headlines. do we have any idea what's in store for us in the new year?
I think we're going to have to hold our breath a little bit at the beginning of 2021, CB. You have this surge that's happening in already overwhelming hospitals because of the Delta variant. And we know that this Omicron variant spreads much faster, 2 to 3 times faster than Delta. It's doubling every few days. So scientists are saying that we can expect some pretty tremendous case numbers in the early to mid part of January. And it's going to be pretty soon the dominant variant here in the United States.
One thing you reported on for us a lot here on ITL was long haul COVID. What else were we able to learn or understand about long haul and long haulers this year?
Sure. Well, we know it is a tough struggle for these patients, and really a lot of the answers that both doctors and researchers are trying to find right now, CB, are still like the really early of who gets affected most. Why is this affecting some people more than others? You know, there's so many different symptoms, everything from like brain fog to stomach aches to a racing heartbeat.
I get reminded sometimes, and I just feel kind of hopeless sometimes. All my parents are trying to do is help, and I can't do anything about it.
He can't go with his friends, can't jump on the trampoline, the simple things, he can't do those.
You can see in his eyes the pain, is there. And the stomach also hurts too much.
So right now, when you're talking about that research and funding, we are still very much so at the early stages of long haul COVID. I think that's a story that we're going to not only continue to see in 2022, I think we're going to continue to see long haul stories for several years to come. But, anytime we can get the chance to report on these stories, I mean, these patients that are really dealing with a big change in their lives are what I like to call long haul heroes, because they're really just taking it day by day and doing the best that they can. And I think that those are stories that really, when you think about the people that are living with this condition, while the science is interesting, it's their stories that really, I think, can make a big impact.
What I'll say, Lindsey, we appreciate all the work you've done. And if there's one thing that I want for you going into 2022, it's a bit of rest and relaxation. You got the fancy pajamas. I think you are dressed for the right occasion. I think you'll need a little bit of that. You've been so dedicated to covering this and explaining things in a way that really helps us to understand the world around us. So we appreciate your contribution. Lindsey Thies, Newsy's health and science correspondent. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you too, CB.
There are a lot of things that have obviously changed here, but a lot of things left undone with to be continued, and some things that have kind of outright failed.
Welcome back, folks. In 2020, we saw people coalesce around the idea of demands for justice after the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. 2021 was the aftermath, where we saw trials play out, convictions, and movement when it comes to criminal justice reform. Newsy justice correspondent Jamal Andrus has crisscrossed the country covering these stories, and he joins us now. Jamal, good to have you here on ITL's New Year's episode, man. How you doing?
Man, I am swimming in it. There's that crisscrossing the country bit, and then the taking care of the baby bit, and the moving to Dallas bit. So it's a lot going on, man. A lot going on.
Well, this cheers is for you, man. Cheers, brother.
Where's my alcohol? Anyway, let's do that.
I had enough for you, so don't worry about it.
Appreciate that.
Jamal, one of the biggest trials this year involved former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. A jury convicted Chauvin of murder in the killing of George Floyd. There's a lot of action activists and onlookers called for in the immediate aftermath of the Chauvin verdict. Where does some of that action stand now? Where are we?
Yeah. Well, you know, some of that stuff is unfinished, right? Because obviously we saw Derek Chauvin be found guilty on all counts, but there are 3 other officers here. And a lot of the people, specifically the activists in Minneapolis, are very, very concerned with the fate of those 3 officers as well. They haven't stood trial just yet. They're supposed to in early 2022. And that's something that a lot of folks that are local to the area are watching for. The other thing that we constantly heard on the ground there was just, we want people to stay involved, stay in the streets, stay committed to this issue. You know, it's really easy to kind of watch the news and pay attention and protest when everything is shut down, right? But for a lot of these activists who have been working in this area for years, this kind of renewed energy is something they'd like to keep going. And it's obviously hard to tell if that's going to remain the case. Other things just kind of outright failed, right? Specifically in Minneapolis, you had that vote on whether to remake the police department into a department of public safety. And ultimately, that ballot measure failed.
This moment is removing the handcuffs of our city government and saying that the folks that we vote for with city council and the mayor can collectively take the voices of our community and expand public safety so that it's no longer a police-only option.
That was something that the city sort of voted down. So there are some things that just outright failed in that way. And then lastly, there was so much talk of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. That was the sort of federal bill that covered a wide range of policing initiatives, police reform, and it's sort of been left for dead in the Senate. I even spoke to Cory Booker, Senator Cory Booker, about this.
The question should be asked, what is just and what is right?
You know, he just said that they could not come to an agreement and that ultimately, you know, the Republicans that he was working with backtracked on stuff they had already agreed to. And that's when he decided to sort of walk away from the table. So there are a lot of things that have obviously changed here, but a lot of things left undone. With to be continued, and some things that have kind of outright failed.
Jamal, we appreciate all the work that you did for Newsy and for ITL and kind of putting some spotlight on some of these very, very, very serious issues. Newsy's justice correspondent, Jamal Andrus, going into the new year in a new location. Jamal, cheers to you, man.
Yeah, man. I appreciate that suit. Go ahead, brother.
Justice! No peace! No justice! No peace!
In the days following George Floyd's death, Tamika Mallory went to Minneapolis and took to the streets, like so many others, demanding justice. But it was her words during a press conference that permeated the country.
This is a coordinated activity happening across this nation, and so we are in a state of emergency. Black people are dying in a state of emergency.
It's an unfortunate feeling. I know the Derek Chauvins of the world are many. He's not alone. And we know that because there is a young man who literally had to wait for George Floyd to be killed for there to be attention on his issue when he also experienced the same type of abuse from Derek Chauvin.
Chauvin was recently indicted by a federal grand jury in connection with a 2017 incident where he allegedly struck a teenager, quote, multiple times in the head with a flashlight and held his knee on the teen's neck while he was, quote, lying prone, handcuffed, and unresisting.
The work is it's much broader than just George Floyd. George Floyd was a moment that needed to happen so that other people during a pandemic could stop and see.
Floyd's death was the catalyst for what some experts believe to be the largest civil rights demonstration in U.S. history. There were protests in all 50 states, and polls suggest more than 20 million people took to the streets in the 2 weeks following Floyd's death. But Mallory says the real work lies ahead of her, with people like Ma'Khia Bryant, who was shot and killed by an officer in Columbus, Ohio, while attacking another teen with a knife.
Do you know when we're going to get Ma'Khia back? We'll get Ma'Khia back when police training changes.
Bryant's case hasn't received the same attention nor the same support George Floyd did.
I went to the funeral for Ma'Khia Bryant because I know that if she was a perfect victim, the seats would have been filled. Everyone would have been there as if it was a concert.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned the perfect victim. So often that narrative goes unspoken in this thing. But George Floyd simply
had a lot of aspects to his death that made it more palpable for a larger audience. And Ma'Khia Bryant doesn't have a lot of those things. How do you navigate that as an activist?
I look at most of it, and try to figure out where do we have the best opportunity to use this particular incident as a part of the larger narrative of what we're fighting for, right? And I think Ma'Khia Bryant is one of those, because for me, I need to make sure that people understand that the same police department that killed your perfect victim killed Ma'Khia as well.
In Mallory's new book, State of Emergency, she offers potential solutions for addressing police brutality. First among them, defunding police.
Am I an abolitionist? Absolutely. Do I want to get to a point where there are no police in our communities with guns? Absolutely. Are we there in this very moment? No. Why? Because we've been trained that if a person in your home has a mental health breakdown, you have to call 911. We want to start changing and moving away from that, giving people other resources and tools, but they need money. We need resources to be able to undo all the harm that has been done to our communities.
Jamal Andrus, Newsy, Chicago.
I have relearned or reappreciated my love for theater.
This year was an interesting one for cinema. Many folks, myself included, went back to the movies, and there was plenty to check out. Films that had been pushed back finally dropped and gave us that communal movie watching experience all over again. It didn't hurt that we had vaccines this year to add that extra layer of safety and comfort. One person who covered the intricacies of the entertainment industry, including the shutdowns and reopenings of theaters and the films we watched, is Newsy's entertainment correspondent, Casey Mendoza. She joins us here on ITL. Casey, the original friend of ITL, how's it going?
It's going well. I have, like you said, quite a year, and I actually think, I have relearned or reappreciated my love for theater.
That's wonderful. I feel like many of us are in that same place. It's kind of like I went back to the movies and I was like, oh, this is what this is like. because we've had quite a year. I want to cheers to you. Do you have a little something over there that you can sip on?
I do. Just always ready.
Casual. Just had a bottle ready. How about that? Cheers to you, Casey.
Cheers.
Okay, I guess we can get into it now. Now that we've had our go-go juice. Casey, let me ask this. What was your first movie back in theaters?
It was In the Heights, a movie I am so glad I got to see on the big screen, with powerful speakers. But it was a truly, joyous experience, not just because the movie was so fun, but because I had, forgotten what it was like to laugh and cry. There was a lot of crying in a giant movie, or in a giant room full of other people.
Right. I can never look at the term U.S. Navy the same again. One of my favorites this year was Shang-Chi.
Thank you.
It's a movie that you and I have talked about before. It's one that I plan on watching ad nauseum, and I know it was one of your favorites this year. I'm curious to know, how did it do in theaters, and what do you think that says about the future of big box office flicks going forward?
Yeah, so Shang-Chi made over $75 million in its opening weekend. 40 of those dollars were from my husband and I, and it became the highest grossing movie during the quote-unquote COVID era. And for me, that was the movie that I think a lot of people, began to feel more comfortable going back to theaters. And for Marvel specifically, I think it was a good sign to start releasing more movies in theaters again, rather than just Disney+.
Shang-Chi was another huge win, not just in the box office and not just for Marvel fans, but it was a huge win for the AAPI entertainment community, especially considering the character was written with several racist stereotypes. Can you tell me a little bit about how the quote-unquote nerd community is stepping up its game in terms of representation and diversity?
So, during a time that also saw a lot of violence committed against the Asian American community, Shang-Chi and the way it broke stereotypes and it showed AAPI communities authentically on screen and in such a loving, thoughtful way. There were a lot of AAPI talents behind the scenes as well.
This film is a big step in reclaiming the history of kind of injustice in pop culture, especially in Western media.
You okay?
Shang-Chi from the very beginning in the film is clearly a character that is multifaceted, that is funny, that has relationships, that isn't just like this stereotype.
That was a huge thing to celebrate. So the way fans showed up to support that effort reminds me a lot of how fans showed up to the premiere of Black Panther, which is Marvel's first Black superhero. And it makes me personally really excited for more voices in the comic book superhero community, new stories in film, and just more places for people of color to see themselves represented. For many Asian critics and audiences, that's the way to reconcile Hollywood's past harmful depictions and reintroduce audiences to characters that are more than just caricatures or tropes. The way to do that well is to actually have Asian American creatives, like Shang-Chi director Destin Daniel Cretton and writer Dave Callahan, tell the stories.
On a very personal level, I do martial arts. I love martial arts. I love watching it. And it has been really frustrating to see that become a trope. So I love that a lot of Asian and Asian diaspora creatives are being able to reinterpret that.
From HBO Max's Warrior, the CW's Kung Fu, to Netflix's Paper Tigers, Shang-Chi is one of several projects today, written and directed by Asian American artists that are rewriting Hollywood's past wrongs.
Even just the last 3, 4, 5 years, where I'm so excited about people who are actively addressing, I think, like previous wrongs in a way without having it be too moralizing.
After a year of heightened attention on the attacks against AAPI communities, Asian writers, directors, and actors are confronting Hollywood's racist depictions with a greater sense of responsibility.
So when people say, like, what's the big deal? It's who cares? A lot of people, their first experience with an Asian person is somebody they've seen on TV or a movie. And then automatically the assumptions are established and rooted.
It's time to show the world. No, I'm hellbound, but I'm well now. Who I really am.
Let's take a moment to look forward. Casey, what is it you're most excited for in 2022?
I am, just excited to do more. This month I was at San Diego Comic-Con, which was the first Comic-Con from the organization in 2 years. And it was just so great to be surrounded by fans and nerds and just this community of people with shared interests in pop culture. So I'm excited, fingers crossed that I could go again next year.
Casey, for all of the wonderfully substantive work that you've done this year and all the ways you contributed to ITL, I want to thank you and I want to give you one last cheers. Casey Mendoza, Newsy's entertainment correspondent. Happy New Year.
Hey, thank you for having me.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. Remember, you can catch new episodes every weeknight at 9 p.m. Eastern or on demand on Newsy's apps. We hope we'll see you back here soon. We've got more good stuff coming your way on Newsy in just a moment.